Ugh, I do not, I do not love how baby-faced I look right now. That was a mistake with my beard trimmer. That was too short. It'll be back soon enough. Don't love that. What I do love is Pathfinder. Great segue. And we're going to talk a bit about it today in another more unscripted video. I've got a few talking points I want to go over because I'm still relatively new to the system. As I've said, I have a lot to learn. The remaster came out and helped with some things and meant I had to relearn other things. But today I want to talk about the things that I did not know when I started playing the game itself. I did a video a couple of months back and someone thought that that's what that was, rather than being things that I just didn't know about the system at all, and they thought the title was a bit misleading, and whilst I disagreed, I understood what they were saying. This is that video. So this is from the perspective of someone who's been playing a couple of years, Pathfinder 2nd edition remaster specifically, but I suppose it was 2nd edition when I started playing. You get the picture. These are some things that I missed, or didn't understand, or was not aware of when I was actually playing the system, as well as a couple of things that my players didn't know and I had forgotten to mention until it came up. We're going in no particular order, but I'm going to try and tie together some ones that make sense and relate. Just going to kind of talk through it. I'm going to edit it as best as possible so that you're not going to hear a load of ums and ahs and pauses, but it'll be a bit less put together than normal. Not that I necessarily think all my stuff is 100% well put together at the moment, but I'm going to do my best. I am moving in the next few weeks, so these are going to be a little bit more all over the place than they are normal, but that's enough preamble. Let's get into this. The first thing is how stealth works. Not just stealth in general, but you know, the different conditions: hidden, observed, undetected, unnoticed, all that kind of stuff. This was kind of something where I just skirted away from at the start of the game because it seemed like a lot of words and seemed very complicated. It's not as complicated as it seems. If you're observed, people obviously know where you are. If you're hidden, that means that the space that you're in, people can identify, but they aren't exactly sure where they're in that space is. You might be ducking down, you might be leaning a lot, you might be really far forward, so they can still try and make an attack, but it's not guaranteed that they're going to hit you like that. And if you've only got an imprecise sense, things remain hidden, requiring precise sense, usually sight, to actually make something observed. If something is undetected, that means that you're aware that it is somewhere in your presence and you can choose a space and try and attack something there, but you don't know for sure. And then if something is unnoticed, you have no clue it's there whatsoever, which also makes it undetected. And for both of those, you are therefore off guard to that creature. And then if something is concealed from you, that's because you can't see it, even though you are aware that it is there. It's a lot of steps, but they all do make sense. But when you first kind of read about it, it's just a lot of knowledge which goes into your head, and it's just a bit much. The system is not always, simple. I think often we do think it's more complicated than it is, but this is certainly one of those things which when I first kind of read it, I was just like, I'm gonna just use stealth as I remember, but I'm slowly getting the hang of it now and it's making more sense to me. And related to that is taking cover. I knew about this in 5th edition. I missed it for quite a while in Pathfinder until I saw a Rules Lawyer video where he had characters using the take cover mechanics. So thank you, Ronald, for that. How this relates to combat, of course, but also for avoiding notice and stealth, as this gives you a modifier to your stealth. Is obviously if you're hidden behind a piece of cover, that is going to make things less likely to see you. And also the fact that you may need to crouch down, you may need to go prone to use the avoid notice or taking cover, but you can often, it suggests, combine these actions instead of making them do one and then another, which is good to know and nice and, speeds things up a little. And also, moving on from that, monster effects that continue from attacks. For example, how this is where the zombie shambler makes an attack against you with its first action, and if it hits, it is able to immediately follow that up with a grapple attack to try, a grab attack to try and grapple you, and it doesn't increase the multiple attack penalty, and it's not affected by the multiple attack penalty. For the zombie shambler, it only gets 2 actions, so that would be it anyway, but for other creatures, it may have a 3rd action. It could make another attack against you once it's grappled you, or grapple you. No, it couldn't grapple you first, but it could make an attack, grapple you, and then potentially attack again with its bite or something, which I was not kind of entirely sure on. But also the fact that on its follow-up turns, you need to spend that action again, the grab action, in order to sustain the grapple. And that leads me on to more in general grappling, that you need to sustain it. This is one where I just kind of missed the end bit, and so did my players, how you need to make that check so that it is grappled till the end of your next turn. If you want to sustain it, you need to spend another action continuing the grapple. I'd read it in my head as, oh, until the enemy escapes or you physically move or something, they are grappled. But that's not how that works. You need to actually make sure you're sustaining grappling, which makes it, you know, maybe a little bit less effective, or means you've got less chance to do other things with. It makes a lot of sense, makes these effects that these monsters have where they can just do it automatically more powerful. Another one is Reactive Strikes. Now, I still was aware of these over from 5th edition, of course. However, all the ways that they can trigger are a little bit different. If people are moving around you and they don't step, that will trigger a reactive strike, as it's something with the move trait. That doesn't mean if you move around someone 2 spaces to flank them, you'd need to step twice for that. You can't just move, you can't just stride it, which is different to how it works in 5e, or at least how I was used to running it and hearing it run in 5e. You could just move around a person, and as long as you weren't leaving their like threat zone, you would still be fine. But in this case, no, you need to step. Otherwise, you are using something with a move trait, and therefore an enemy can attack. Also, just to worth checking, a couple of my players were not aware that if someone was using a manipulate trait or ranged attack, that you can also use reactive strike against that, because those are a little bit different, or at the very least less clear in 5th edition. It's something that we hadn't clarified immediately and we had to do later. Another one is holding your action. In 5e, this is another thing which I'm not entirely sure if was rules as written or just the way that I ended up running it and people in general run it, or maybe it's not how people in general run it, but it's how I ran it. Is you can choose an action that you wish to take and you can choose a trigger, and when that trigger happens, you use the action. Simple as that. In Pathfinder, because we have specific rules for this, you need 2 actions to perform a 1-action task and 3 actions to perform a 2-action task. You cannot perform a 3-action task holding your action, and then you also need your reaction in order to do that. This was something I was not aware of until my Laios video, where a commenter pointed out that Laios had used his prepared action and also used a reaction to shield block. So thank you for that, because I did not know that, and it makes a lot of sense, because just reading, there's a lot of text, and sometimes when you're learning a new system and you're trying to skip it and get it onto your head quickly, you just skip over things, and that's something that I missed. And that is the same for this next one, which is using the Demoralize action and trying to intimidate. This is a way you can cause the frightened effect on enemies. Sharing a language certainly helps, but is not required. However, Demoralize can only be used to make a foe frightened every 10 minutes. They then become immune. It doesn't apply to all methods of frightening, but in early games in our Abomination Vaults campaign, we had a couple of characters who would be frightening things every round, or trying to, as one of their 3 actions, and we discovered fairly quickly that, oh, no, actually, you can't do that. You've got to use other methods of frightening, or just try and do something else with your action. Also, making sure that you understand how multiple attack penalties work. Obviously, in general, these are simple. It's a -5 and a -10, or -4 and a -8 with agile weapons. And then if you've got, various classes, things get a little bit more complicated. You get less modifiers and things like that, like with the Flurry Ranger. Our initial set of characters included a Magus, and me and the player both had misread how their spell strike worked, where it says you factor in 2 instances of multiple attack penalty when you use this. When we read it, we both read that as that happens first, and then you make the attack, so you're at a penalty. Obviously it's not, it's the other way around. It's the penalty increases doubly because you made 2 attacks essentially after, but we hadn't quite clocked that. And this is one of those things that it's worth checking for, because different things work in different ways. The double slice ability takes 2 actions, but you have no multiple attack penalty until after both, whereas Flurry does have the increments of the multiple attack penalty, but the increments are lesser because you are using your Flurry Ranger ability. So there we go. Multiple attack penalty sounds simple, most of the time is simple, but just double check you understand your own abilities or your player's abilities if they are new to the system, or it's a new ability for them. And the same can also be true of cantrips and focus spells. Many of my players were affected by this more so than I was, but it's a thing that I didn't have to utilize too much, as the spells are just, I know how the spells for the monsters work because I check them beforehand, whereas theirs sometimes have a couple of weeks between a game and they would forget how theirs worked. But cantrips and focus spells in Pathfinder 2nd edition both round up to both heighten to half your level rounded up, and so they become more powerful as time goes on, which to an extent happens in 5th edition, but I certainly didn't feel like it happened as often, or they felt as powerful. But that might just be me. I didn't play an awful lot of casters. 5e cantrips aside, it's worth keeping in mind for lower level damaging spells, therefore, that you might want to change these out for something that's going to provide some utility or boost and put a lower level spell in a higher level rank if you're able to do that, or just have some higher ranking damage spells, because the lower ones are going to be very quickly outclassed by your cantrips. Focus spells as well. Some of them are even more damaging than the cantrips and they come back as often. But I'd have players that for a while were not using their various cantrips, like the metal shard one, the name has escaped me, or their poison spray and the acid blast. I think those are the ones, because they thought it was going to do minimal damage and then it wasn't. We had a couple of focus spells, one on our champion defender who had the shield one, Shields of the Spirit I think, where you deal damage when people attack you for a round, and they thought it was just 1d round, but it's 1d4 a round, but it was 5d4 or something now because of how much higher level they were, and so it's suddenly a lot more damage, and it suddenly became a very powerful thing, and they were fighting an awful lot of enemies at the time, and it became very powerful and very useful, and they just hadn't kind of clocked, because they hadn't read the final bit, and I hadn't reminded them that, yeah, these things do scale with you to keep them more relevant and powerful, which is good to know. A more team-based one is healing. It took some time for us to get used to the fact that you need someone really to be trained in medicine so that they can treat wounds and things, and you need to have the healer's kit, especially if you don't have a cleric, but even if you do. Pathfinder is a team-based game, and you need to be working together at all stages really to make it as effective as you can. Ultimately, you just need to remind sometimes your players to cooperate both in combat and also to an extent when making characters. You can do what you like, but it is worth communicating and figuring out if you guys do have any good synergies or any weaknesses that you might want to try and see if you can figure out and sort out when you are creating characters for the first time. And healing was definitely one of the largest parts of this. We had a couple of parties after some characters had died where they'd go to heal and go, oh hang on, we don't have anyone who can do this, we better go back to town and get some potions or have a rest or something like that. Nearly through everything now. Finally, a couple from my players. One, using item levels, rather the fact that they had kind of clocked them as if an item was of this level, that means they could not use it until they were that level. It's not a video game, that's not how it works. The item levels, at least from my understanding, are more to suggest at what point the player characters should be getting these items and for when you're giving out high level starting equipment. A PC can technically find a level 15 item at level 1, it's just going to make them very powerful, so you've got to keep that in mind. But there is nothing to stop them from actually using them if and when they find them. And finally, explore actions. These aren't really a thing in 5th edition and a lot of other games at all, and they're certainly not given as many rules as they are here in Pathfinder. And whilst we haven't had them come up an awful lot, mostly doing a dungeon crawl, we've been using defend and scout a little bit, but that is something that some of my players were using a little, and some of my players were not aware of at all, and were just kind of confused and eventually mentioned, and we went, oh no, these are explore actions, and clearly we'd not talked about them, and whoops. Downtime actions are also a thing that we haven't come across, but that's really because there hasn't been that much downtime, and that's certainly something I'm looking forward to with our next campaign, which is going to be a lot more relaxed and less of an agenda of where it's going and what it's doing, less of a dungeon crawl, and more just general time to cover things like downtime rules and exploration and stuff like that, which will be a lot of fun, I'm sure. But there we go, that's 10 or so. I think a bit more, I didn't exactly count, but I know it's more than 10. Things that when I started Pathfinder I did not know or I misunderstood that I now have a better understanding of. I'm really hoping that I explained all of those correctly and there's no glaring errors. If there are, as always, let me know down in the comments below, and for this one especially, I'll make sure I definitely pin that, because I don't want to be throwing out any more accidental incorrect information than we have. But if you've enjoyed this video, please give the video a like and subscribe, it really helps out. We've just passed 300 subscribers. I am crossing my fingers that we might reach 500 by the end of the year. You never know. 300 always seemed like quite a way off when I did start this thing, and we've got there, so if you could subscribe it would really help out. But that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.